Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me on YouTube and on Instagram. Go ahead and like, go ahead and subscribe, go ahead and follow. You'll see me on these videos just saying things I think need to be said. That's all. That's all we're doing here. And before I begin, happy Black History Month. So for those of you in America, in February's we always celebrate Black History Month. Make sure we recognize Black Americans and the contributions that they've made to our great country. And so in that spirit, we're going to go into part 3 of our series on the language of justice. We're still talking about how we talk about justice when we talk about it. And for Black History Month, I want to start us off talking about how we talk about race and ethnicity when we talk about justice, because it's not simply the fact that people aren't being treated equally and fairly. The truth is, there are certain people who, because of who they are, how they look, where they're from, they're the ones that are being treated unjustly and unequally. And they're the ones who are experiencing these disproportionate impacts from climate change, from how we manage water and waste, and how we generate electricity and energy. And so we got to talk about race and ethnicity in the proper way. And we have to be very specific about what we're talking about, who we're talking about, what are we saying? What are we advocating for? Who are we advocating for? It's not just enough to say that there are some people, certain communities, certain areas that are experiencing injustice. We have to be very specific and targeted and direct when we talk about it. We have to do that. We can't use these vague terms to talk about specific groups of people who are experiencing specific types of injustice. We can't do that. We have to be specific and direct. For instance, I get really tired of people talking about communities of color. Do you get tired of that? Like everywhere I turn, we're talking about how we want to pick up and lift up communities of color, as though all those communities are all the same and they're all experiencing the exact same things all the time. That's not true. These communities of color have very specific contexts, very specific types of individuals and families and cultures and heritages and histories that need to be recognized and acknowledged and engaged properly. Don't tell me about communities of color. Are we talking about Black communities? Let's say the word Black if we're talking about Black communities. Are we talking about Indigenous, Native American, Alaska Native? What are we talking about? Use the terms, use the words, be very specific. When we talk about justice, we know who we're talking about when we're asking you to change how you treat certain communities. And so we just need to say who they are. We don't have to hide. We don't have to pretend like it's going to be offensive to point out the obvious, right? So I'm in South Carolina. There's a lot of injustice in my state. It happens. But I know who it's happening to. And for the most part, it's the Black communities, the Black populations in this state. And so if I'm ever talking about injustice in South Carolina, you need to hear me talk about Black neighborhoods, Black communities, Black people. They're the ones who are experiencing the injustice. If we're talking about low income, then okay, low income is fine. Are they rural? Are they urban? Be specific. Be specific. Don't come with me with these communities of color. Don't come with me with people of color. Don't come with me with minority communities. I don't want to talk about minorities. I want to talk about the people who are specifically being harmed by whatever's going on in their area. That's what I want to talk about. So when we talk about justice, when we use this language, this framing, that there are people who are being unjustly, unfairly treated, let's just be specific. Name them. Name them. Are we talking about Latin, Latinx, Latina, Latino, Hispanic communities? Then say the name. Are we talking about this pocket of immigrants that moved to your city and that they live in this certain part of town and that part of town is being neglected? Say the place, say the people, just say who it is. Because when we hide behind the of color phrasing or the minority or the marginalized communities types of language, we give people outs. We give people opportunities to not do the thing that we want them to do. They can go somewhere else, do something else, and then they can say, well, we did it for these minorities over here, these minorities over there. We're supporting marginalized areas by doing these particular things. No, I have a problem with what you're doing to this specific community right here. So let's identify them. Let's look at their history, why they are where they are, and how we got here. And let's do something about that. That's what we want to talk about. That's what we want to do. We don't want to talk about um, the people who are underrepresented and underprivileged and underserved. We want to talk about, are they black people who have been underprivileged and underrepresented and underserved? Are they Asian? Now, when I say Asian, what does that mean? Because Asia is a big continent with lots of different types of people on it. So be specific. Are we talking about Chinese people, Korean people, people from Singapore, Thailand, Vietnamese, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi? What are you talking about? Asian. What are you talking about? Be specific. There's a specific group of people that you want to advocate for. Say the name. And look, I understand. I get it, right? So when it's time to build coalitions, we want to kind of come together under one banner. We want to be able to kind of move as a unit. And so, we're better together. So let's have a frame where we can all fit in and we can all go together and we can all speak to the decision makers as one big unit. And that way we have more power. I understand that. If that's the goal, then be specific about that when you talk about justice. Say, look, there's this community here, that community there, them over there, these people behind me. We're all here. All of us from these different communities coming together for this reason. That's why we're here. That's what we're asking you for, what we want you to do. Because all of these different communities who you have chosen to not invest in, to not support, are all experiencing different problems that you could address if you do these things on our behalf. Now we're talking like a coalition of people who have individual identities, but who come together for a common purpose and who want to push the thing forward. But don't allow the language to be co opted and taken out of your neighborhood and placed on everyone else's neighborhood as though we're all the same and we all have the same situations. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because when we want to talk about some specific injustice, we want to make sure we name the communities, we name the actors who are inflicting the injustice, and we want to talk about how the specific changes could be made to specifically help those specific communities because that's why we're here. That's why this happened. Because this community was neglected, they were abandoned, they were not invested in. That's why we do that. So don't don't write, don't read, don't continue to parrot these antiquated, outdated terms that were meant to keep you in an other category and use them as though they're going to be helpful today. Don't do it. You're not a minority. You're not a marginalized community. You're a person with a real heritage, a real culture, a real background, a real history that needs to be acknowledged. And people shouldn't be able to misclassify you just to make themselves feel better about what they're doing somewhere else. Don't let that happen. Your your background, your people, your ancestors, your heritage is beautiful. It needs to be acknowledged, and if it's being trampled on unjustly, you need to make sure it's known that that's what's happening. That's what's happening. We're not just a bunch of underprivileged people walking around hoping for the best. We're a group of black people who have this background in culture and heritage, and we're Chinese and we're Japanese and we're indigenous to this land, and we're from Central America and South America and Africa and Asia and Australia, all these different places. That's what's going on here. We need to make sure we acknowledge that. And the last thing I'll say is that I think the biggest problem is that we have centered white in our discussion. That's why you can get away with this stuff. We have decided for some reason in America, well, I know the reason, I mean, it's historical, but in America, we have white right at the center. And if you're not considered white, which is another story, if you're not considered white, then you're something else. And it doesn't matter what else you are, you're just not that. That's when you become a person of color. You become a minority. You become marginalized. You're pushed to the margins because you're not at the center. You're not white. And that hurts everybody, not just those who aren't. Because if you're a white person watching this, I promise you, you're much more than a color. You're much more than like the color of the sky. I mean, you have a background too. You have a heritage too. I don't even know what it is. We just call you white and you call him black and you call her brown. Like we have this color coded system that just washes away all of the beauty in our cultures in our communities. All of them. Nobody should want that. You shouldn't want to be white. You should be whatever your family is. Are they from England, Ireland, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, France? Where are they from? What language do they speak? What's your background? That's what we should be talking about. We should move away from this race talk. Get to the ethnicity, get to the heritage and the backgrounds, because that's what's really important. That's what makes us who we are. It's not the color. Nobody cares about the color. The color is not important. What's important is where you're from and who you are and what you like, what you value, and what matters to you. Not the color of your skin. I mean, can you imagine? You look at somebody, you see their color, and you decide what you believe about them because of the color? That's just silly. It's silly. And of course, there are privileges to being in that white category. And so people are more than happy to be called that because it allows you to get access to things that the others don't get access to. That's why for so long, the people who are considered white has been expanding, right? It's been expanding because people want those privileges. I want you to put me in that category so I can get what you have. So for a long time, people who are from Ireland were not considered white. They are now. People from Israel, our Jewish communities. Some people still don't consider them white. I do, but it's fine. You're Jewish. You have a beautiful history and heritage. Don't fight for the white label. Don't fight for it. And if you have it, fine. Use the privileges for good. Whatever you believe can make this world better, use what you have to do that. But don't, we can't keep focusing on these colors. And for all of my justice activists out there and advocates, look, these are real people. We're real people. Let's talk about the real people that we want to have justice for. Let's talk about them and let's lift up their stories, their backgrounds. How did they get to this land? How did they get in this position? Where are they from? What did they do? in their neighborhoods, in their villages, in their towns. Let's talk about the people, not about their color, and not about whether or not they're in or out of the white category. Let's just talk about people as they are, who they are, and advocate on their behalf for justice. That's what we want. We want justice for everyone, not for just certain groups. We want everyone to be treated the same. We want your water to taste the same, no matter who you are. We want your air to be clean, no matter who you are. We want your soil and your farming and agriculture to be prosperous and fruitful, no matter who you are. We want you to have restaurants and foods and grocery stores that are healthy and that add to a better quality of life, no matter who you are. It doesn't matter. So let's set aside the coloring and talk about the people. Talk about the people. And if we can do that, we can totally shift and revolutionize our language around justice. We can do that. We can have a world where you're not just white, red, yellow, brown, or black, but you can be Polish, Mexican, Argentinian, El Salvadorian, African American, Nigerian, Romanian, Italian, Chinese. Like, we need to talk like that. That's what's important, and that's what makes things so much better. And when we start humanizing people in that way, we can then push for the kinds of changes that are clearly not based on color, but it's based on justice. We're trying to do things better and not just do things to these other people so we won't be bothered. Let's look out for each other and let's tell the stories and use our language and talk about justice in ways that highlight the best and that bring to the forefront who we truly are and not simply just the color you are. Let's try that. Until next time, stay safe and keep fighting.